Hi everyone, it's Miss Jen, and today I am borrowing the boat of Mr. Matt and Miss Jamie because we're going to talk about what happened to Paul when he was in the boat. So if you want to do an activity with me, we're going to need a glass jar that has a lid. If you don't have one of these kind of glass jars, you can use a water bottle. That'll work too, but make sure it's one that you can see inside, not a metal one that you can see inside. So get whatever container you're going to use, and you want to fill it almost to the top. Leave about an inch or so at the top and put your lid on nice and tight, okay? So go pause the video, get what you need, and then turn it back on when you're ready. Alright, so Mr. Dan's going to help us with this so you guys can see better for the camera. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a storm inside of our jar. So you're going to take your jar or your water bottle, whichever you're using, and you're going to spin it really fast in a circle. Really fast, keep spinning, and then stop. Do you see that? Did you make a tornado in your jar? Is that pretty cool? All right, so we're talking today about what happened to Paul when he was in a storm. And if we want to find out what happened, we're going to look in the book of Acts. Now turn to the person next to you. Is Acts in the Old or the New Testament? Shout it out. It's in the New Testament, right? So here's what's happening. Paul's going on his third missionary trip, and he's traveling from town to town teaching people about Jesus. And he's given the gift of healing from God, so he's healing people when he's in those towns too. But not everyone likes what he's saying, and he's often beaten and he's often kicked out of towns. And one day he's in Jerusalem in the temple, and a mob comes and they start beating him because he'd been teaching about Jesus. Well, the Roman soldiers see what's happening and they think this man must be a criminal. So they put him in chains, they take him to jail, and then they start whipping him and beating him while he's in jail. And while he's there, God gives Paul a message, and this is what God says to Paul. He says, "Be encouraged, Paul. Just as you've told the people about me here in Jerusalem, you must preach the good news in Rome." So God tells Paul that he's going to go to Rome and he's going to teach people about him in Rome. But right now, Paul's in jail. Now, in order for Paul to have a trial, he needs to go to another town. And there's some men that are planning to kill him as Paul's traveling to that town. But the commander decides to get Paul to the next town. He's going to send with him 200 soldiers, 200 spearmen, and 70 horsemen. All of those people surround Paul, and they help him safely get to the next town. God protects him. And he's at the next town so he can meet with the governor, but he's still very far from Rome. And the governor talks to him, and he hears his case, and he says, "You know what? I need some more time to make a decision about your case." So for 2 years, Paul is in that jail waiting for the governor to make a decision. And finally, after those 2 years, it's decided that Paul's going to be put on a ship with other prisoners, and he's going to be taken to Rome so he can have a trial. Now, Rome's very far away, so they're going to sail there. And the way to go, they start stopping from town to town. They're making some stops along the way. Their ship gets in a storm, and it gets blown off course. Finally, they get back on track, but so much time has been lost, it's close to winter, and it's not safe to sail anymore. But the sailors decide they're going to go to one more town so they can get a better spot to spend the winter. And that's what they do. They start going along the shore to the next town, and all of a sudden a huge gust of wind comes, and a huge storm comes, and it blows their ship way out into the sea. And the sailors can't control their ship. It's going wherever the wind is taking them, and there's huge waves crashing. And the sailors start taking the ropes, and they start wrapping ropes around the ship, trying to tie the ship together so it can stay together and not break in the wind and the waves. And they're in this horrible storm. And the next day, here's what it says happens. They're still in that storm, and listen to what happens. Gotta turn the page, hold on. The next day, as gale force winds continued to batter the ship, the crew began throwing the cargo overboard. The following day, they even threw out the ship's equipment and anything else they could lay their hands on. The terrible storm raged unabated for many days, blotting out the sun and the stars, until at last, all hope was gone. So this storm is so bad, it's lasting for days. The sailors start throwing everything overboard. They're getting rid of their food, they're getting rid of all of their supplies. doing whatever they can to keep the boat from sinking. And the sky is so dark from this storm that it's been days since they've seen the sun or they've seen the stars. Can you imagine? This is a horrible storm, and it's going on for days. The sailors have given up hope. They think they're going to die in the middle of the sea. And it certainly doesn't look like Paul's going to make it to Rome. And yet God had promised Paul that he was going to go to Rome. So after several days in the storm, Paul calls the sailors together to encourage them. And this is what Paul says to them. Take courage. None of you will lose your lives, even though the ship will go down. So Paul says this ship is going to sink in the middle of the sea. But don't be afraid. For last night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me. And he said, don't be afraid, Paul, for you will surely stand trial before Caesar. Caesar's the ruler in Rome. So the angel said, Paul, you're going to go to Rome and you're going to have your trial. What's more, God in his goodness has granted safety to everyone sailing with you. So take courage, for I believe God. It will be just as he said. So Paul could encourage the soldiers, and Paul could be brave even in the middle of that horrible storm because he knew God had told him that he was going to go to Rome. And Paul trusted that God was going to keep his promises. And they stayed in that storm in the middle of the sea. It lasted for 14 days. And finally, after 14 days, they saw some land up ahead. They had no idea where they were, but the sailors thought maybe they could squeeze the boat in between the rocks and get to that land. So that's what they tried to do. Except the boat got stuck in the rocks, it got stuck in the sandbars. The boat was stuck, and the waves and the wind were still crashing, and it was bashing the boat into the rocks, and the boat was breaking into tons of pieces, and the boat was going down. And the captain said, everyone who can swim, jump and swim to shore. And if you can't swim, grab onto a piece of broken boat floating in the water and try to float your way there. And every person on that ship, there were 276 people on board. Every single one of them made it safely to shore because God protected them. And they got to the island. They realized they were on an island called Malta, and the people were very kind to them. They made a fire so they could get warm. And Paul started picking up some sticks to put on the fire. And as he did, a snake came, and it grabbed onto Paul's hand and bit him. So Paul shook the snake off into the water. And all the people from the island were like, oh no, because it was a poisonous snake. And they waited for Paul's arm to swell up, and they were watching for Paul to die. Because this kind of snake, you would die when you got bit from it. But guess what? Paul was not harmed because God had promised Paul that he was going to go to Rome, and God kept Paul safe. So they spent 3 months on that island until it was safe to sail again. Then Paul and the other prisoners were put on a different ship that was going to Rome. They made some stops along the way, but finally Paul made it to Rome just like God had promised, and God kept his promise. See, God had promised Paul he was going to go to Rome, but it certainly didn't seem like it. There were so many things that made it seem like Paul was never going to make it, but God wasn't going to keep his promise. But he does. This glass is like our Paul. This is like Paul. But there were so many obstacles keeping Paul from getting to Rome and making it seem like he was going to make it, right? I hope we got to shake this first. He was arrested. And people tried to kill him. He was in jail for 2 years. He was in that shipwreck. He was stuck on the island. And it seemed like there was no way that God's promises were going to come true. Right? These are God's promises. God had made a promise he was going to go to Rome, but it seemed like there was no way that that was going to happen. Right? It seemed impossible. Like there was too much holding him back. But guess what? God has a way to make a way through what seems impossible in order for his promises to happen. Can you see that coming through? God makes a way, even though it seems impossible. God can make a way for his promises to happen because God is faithful. And when he promises he's going to do something, his promise comes through. He makes it happen. Whoops, losing everything here. Okay. Look at my hands. All right, so here's the deal. God is still faithful for us today. He wasn't just faithful when Paul was alive. He's faithful for us today. God had told Paul he was going to go to Rome, and he had to wait. He had to wait almost 3 years and from when God said he was going to go until he actually got there. And he went through all kinds of trouble in order for that to happen. And guess what? Do you know how long you've been stuck inside your house? It's been 10 weeks. And that stinks. But it's not nearly as long as what Paul had to go through. But guess what? God is still keeping his promises for you and I today. Because this book is filled with promises from God. And here's what God says. It says in his word that this too shall pass. That means that this is going to end. We're not going to be stuck in our homes forever. We're going to be able to go out and do things again. It's God's promise. It will come true. And Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. It's trouble to be stuck inside our house, right? That's a trouble for us. But Jesus also made a promise when he said that. And he said, take heart, for I have overcome the world. He promised that he's going to be with us. He promised that he will help us through that tough time. He promises that he's making a place in heaven for us where we won't have to go through any tough times at all. That he will never leave us. He will never stop loving us. Those are his promises for us, and they are just as true for us today as they were true for Paul. We might have to wait, just like Paul had to wait, but God keeps his promises, and all of his promises will come true because God is faithful, and he does what he says he will do. All right, so let's thank him for that. Let's pray, guys. Father God, we just thank you for the chance to be together today. We thank you for the opportunity to borrow this boat to teach from, Lord. And just thank you for wonderful Sunday school teachers that you've given for our Sunday school program, Lord. So we just praise you for them. And we just thank you that you are a faithful God, Lord. You keep your word. We thank you for that. We thank you that when you speak, you follow through. We make promises sometimes, and we forget, and we mess up, and we fall short. But you never do, Lord God. You are faithful. You keep your word. We thank you for the promises of your word. We thank you for sending your son, Jesus. We thank you that we are never alone and that you never stop loving us and that you will help us even in the midst of this tough time, Lord. We thank you that you are walking beside us and you are with us. And we just claim your promises today. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. All right, guys. So before I go, just a reminder from last week, I said that we're going to play that Don't Eat Pete game. So if you want to play, here's what you need to do. You need to sign up on the link underneath this lesson. Sign up on the link. And what we'll do is, you sign up, I will mail you a packet in the mail. And in the packet, we'll have your game board and your pictures to add. And every Sunday in the month of June, you will add the pictures that match the lesson to your game board. And then the last Sunday in June, we'll play the Don't Eat Pete game together live for a live Sunday school. We'll do it all together. And I'll mail you everything you need to be able to play that game. But you need to sign up so I know that you want to play and I can mail it to you. All right, so click on the link and sign up. And then after you do that, go ahead and click on the links for the activities, all right? And I'll see you next week.